What is up, guys? Pie Muffin here, and I've been wanting to make this video for a while, kind of just talking about the Tales franchise and what really draws people to it. Why do people feel so emotionally invested? Why do we feel connected to these characters so much? And just why it's such a great series overall. Because it's one of those series that is very underappreciated. Although it has a decent following, it's nothing compared to obviously mainstream animes or mainstream games. Like Dragon Ball as an anime and Final Fantasy as a game franchise both have a way bigger following than the Tales franchise, even though the Tales franchise has been here for many years. It's still not something that's ever really been hugely mainstreamed, and honestly it's kind of a sad thing that it's not, because there are so many characters that us as fans really get attached to. Just like any other, anime or video game, you've got a storyline, you fall in love with these characters, and you go on this huge journey with these characters, and once it's all over, you're like, wow, all the growth and all the exposition and everything these characters had to deal with, like, you feel for these characters, and it's almost as if they become a part of your life. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm way too much of a fan, but I know there are a lot of Tales fans, more so in Japan. A lot of Japanese fans feel way more connected to these characters than we will ever. Obviously, because they have more of it. Tales of Asteria and Tales of the Rays are both huge deals in the mobile market in Japan. That's why they're sticking around. Tales of Link, not so much. It had a decent run. It had 3 years in Japan. But I'm guessing it was just the gameplay that made it fall short for mobile games. But anyways, the reason I wanted to make this video is because Tales of the Rays just came out with, in Japan, obviously, if you're playing the English version, you won't get this expansion, I guess I could call it, until probably 4 or 5 months down the line. They released part 2, and they actually revamped the entire app. It's called Mirage Prison. So the first 13 chapters, I believe it was either 13 or I think there's 14 chapters in part 1, and then part 2 starts the whole storyline. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers about Tales games in this video, so if you are not caught up, if you're only playing the English version of Rays or any other Tales game, you might want to click off this video till you're caught up. So, obviously, we know that Ix somehow, obviously I can't read Japanese, but I do watch the cutscenes and kind of piece together what's kind of going on and ask people. Ix did sacrifice himself to stop some sort of calamity, and that's why we hear Melina screaming at the end of Chapter 14. And then Chapter 14, or Part 2, basically begins from there, where we see Kosis, who was Ix's little fairy friend, become an Ix lookalike, so to speak, a human version. But back to the main point of feeling for these characters, even if it's just like, obviously Tales of the Rays isn't as impactful because we don't have the tons of cutscenes that kind of, push these characters together. But even just getting to this part where hearing Melina scream, like she was like, no, like this can't be happening, when you hear a character scream out like that, a character you've been invested with, we could go to other things as well. For example, in Tales of Vesperia, when they were at the top of the capital, when Estelle was being possessed and Yuri was forced to fight her, that scene where Yuri was telling her, do you really want to live and die as a tool? Like, we went through this whole adventure of Estelle trying to find out who she was and who she wanted to be as a person, and that she just wanted to help those around her. She didn't want to be the princess who's just cooped up in a castle. But then you find out in the end, like, this was all just part of a plan to use her for Alexei's selfish goals, and she didn't even have a choice in the matter at that point. She was under control. Her heir and everything, her powers of the Child of the Full Moon were completely under his control, and I don't even know if she was honestly aware. She must have been aware deep down. It must have been a subconscious thing. She was not in control of her body, but she was still aware of everything that's happening. And she wasn't able to break free until Yuri really talked some sense into her. Yuri's kind of that tough love kind of guy. So his words really broke through to her, and that's when she broke down, started crying, and regained control of herself. Another example of really feeling for characters, if we go to Tales of Berseria, right in the beginning of the game, you really feel for Velvet's character. I mean, unless you're just a heartless bastard, but not only does she lose her elder sister when she was, I don't, how old must she have been? She didn't look like she was more than, 12 or 13 years old in that first scene. And then, her life starts to get better and everything. She starts to get used to living with Arthur and Laphicet. And then the whole shebang happens with Arthur sacrificing Laphicet, to basically save the world and awaken Enominat as one of the two sacrifices. But it's just one of those things, you see all this hardship that Velvet had to deal with. She lost her sister, then she finds out, her brother-in-law was basically a scumbag, and Laphicet, her last family, her brother, was sacrificed for something greater, and she doesn't even find out till later that it was his own doing. He had the 12-year sickness, and he was going to die anyway, so Laphicet wanted to sacrifice himself for the greater good, even though the greater good was, controlling all of humanity and taking away their free will. Velvet wasn't aware of this. Her mind and everything was just completely broken. She got turned into a Therian, thrown into a pit, and was basically stuck in a cell for 3 years just feeding on demons. Another character we can look at is, well, I guess this would be more the Shepherd Michael. If we go to Tales of Zestiria, the Shepherd Michael, who isn't a playable character, and honestly you don't really get to be connected with too much, but by association it was, so let's just go, so the Shepherd Michael obviously was the shepherd before Sorey, or at least one of them before Sorey. We don't know if there were any in between, but it's safe to assume that Michael was probably the last one before Sorey. Michael, he did what he had to do to be the shepherd. He did great stuff. And then the whole thing with Heldalf. Heldalf used him so that he could get that land as a higher ground for his military. His military would have more of an advantage against Highland. And because of all this, that caused Michael to break. Having his entire village that he was in charge of just completely destroyed, people killed. He wanted to curse Heldalf, so he took his sister's unborn child and sacrificed it to curse Heldalf with eternal loneliness. Obviously, we're not going to feel bad for Heldalf because he deserved it, because he's a scumbag. But because of that sacrifice, that's what caused Mikleo to become a seraph. And then Mikleo has to deal with finding out about all of his past and everything, and about his mother's sacrifices. And obviously, if you just if you only played the game, then Mikleo actually gets to see it happen and can't do anything to stop it. Tales of the Abyss. Obviously Luke was a little douchebag in the beginning of the game. He was that entitled prince that expected everything to be easy. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? But once that entire city falls because of him, once those, I don't even know how many, there were probably thousands of people living in that city. They all died because of him. That's what really caused the change in him. Being a person that's responsible for thousands of people dying makes a character, or just makes anybody, realize that, this is all my fault. What do I do to atone for this? You're going to put the blame on yourself, unless, like I said, unless you're an entitled douchebag, you will feel bad about this kind of stuff. And obviously not to the extreme that these characters have to deal with, but as people in the real world, as people who watch these animes and play these games of Tales, we can on some level connect with these characters. Whether it's something like you didn't have parents who were really there, because there are Tales characters who were just like that, or you weren't able to live up to your potential. You didn't do everything that you thought you were going to be able to do. There are characters in the Tales series like that. Racism plays a huge part in Tales of Symphonia. A lot of people can just play through the game and just be like, oh, there's, that was a fun game. But if you really look deep into these storylines, there is a lot of depth in these storylines. For example, the whole thing with the Desians and the Renegades and the Half-Elves. Half-Elves were extremely segregated against in this world. Elves, you're fine. Humans, you're fine. You're in the middle. You're the worst of the worst, and the world looks at you a different way. That's like Genis and Rain had to hide their identities. Not their identities. They didn't hide who they were. They hid the race that they were. They were just like, oh, we're just elves. Because there's really, in the actual game, there's not really a huge difference between elves and half-elves unless you really, know your stuff, or if you come out explicitly and say it. So characters like Genis and Rain were living in fear of Lloyd and the others knowing who they were, even though Lloyd wouldn't care. Lloyd's the kind of person, he doesn't care. You could be a frog, you could be whatever. Lloyd's not going to look at you a different way, but obviously that was an important part of the story arc for Genis and Rain, to coming to terms with who they were and accepting that just because they are half-elves doesn't make them as bad as the other half-elves who are causing destruction all over the world. Obviously, half-elves are segregated against because of the Desians. The Desians are made up of a ton of half-elves. So, I would say probably one of my favorite storylines, and obviously there are a lot of fans who don't like Symphonia 2, but just the dynamic between Emil and Marta, just the story between them and how their relationship grows. I know there's obviously Asbel and Cheria have a real relationship, but of all the Tales games I played, I really, felt connected with Emil and Marta. Because at a time, and this is going to sound silly to a lot of people, I'm sure I'll get some jokes made, but, I was going through a hard time in, school when it was coming out with relationships and stuff, and I was dealing with a bad heartbreak. Going through the entire story of Symphonia 2 really kind of, took my mind off of it. Just seeing the kind of relationship that Emil and Marta had. Obviously, in the beginning, it was just one of those things where Emil, who used to be, I believe he was Aster. I believe that was his original name before he was reincarnated, but I may be wrong on that. But he saves her family completely unaware, or he saves her, from fake Lloyd, and immediately she just falls for him like that. And at first it's just kind of one of those things where she's just kind of looking for someone to push her feelings onto, and he's just kind of awkward about it. He doesn't know what to do, but you see Emil go from this very scared, timid, teenager, and honestly, we don't really know how much time goes by in Symphonia 2. Safe to say probably maybe a year probably goes by through that whole time. He transforms into a very courageous person. The fact that he was able to, at the end of the game, not only fight against Ratatosk, who was living inside him, he was able to pretend to be Ratatosk and fight all of his friends, and almost kill the woman that he fell in love with. It's insane. Another character, Carol, going back to Tales of Vesperia, Carol was someone who just had to always make excuses for something, and always, what's the easiest way to kind of get out of this? Oh, can people do the fighting for me? And then in the Zofia Rift, he fought that monster on his own. All of his comrades couldn't fight back. He took the fight by himself. It was insane. And I know I'm just kind of giving a lot of examples to different instances of characters doing phenomenal things, but that's exactly it. That's why we, as fans of the series, really fall in love with these characters, because it's such expansive storylines of seeing a character get from point A to point B, or even point A to point Z, and having B through Y being all these trials and tribulations that they have to go through in different issues. And honestly, some of the time these issues are heartbreaking. And I think that's what makes the series great. And honestly, it should be something that's more mainstream because these storylines are so well worked on by Bandai and all the other companies that are involved. And it's been something that's been going on for 15 plus years. I mean, obviously, we don't know when the next game is going to come out. It seems like they're focusing a lot of their talent on Tales of the Rays and Tales of Asteria. But honestly, I see it this way. The longer they take making a new game, the better it's going to be. Obviously, some games correlate with each other, like Symphonia 1 and 2, Xillia 1 and 2. We have Berseria being the 1,000 year before prequel to Zestiria, even though Zestiria came out first. There's a lot that's thought out about it. Obviously, Zestiria was made first, and then they created the whole backstory based on everything they had already built upon, kind of like Star Wars. I just know anytime I play a Tales game, anytime I decide to put my 40 plus hours into a game, it doesn't even feel like it's 40 hours. It feels like it's something way beyond that. I feel like I've spent months on this game because all the cutscenes, all the dialogue, all the interactions between all these different characters, seeing all these characters grow. You usually have like 7 or 8 main characters that are a part of your party that grow within this time span. It's just so incredible, and it's honestly something that's also sometimes hard to put into words. I remember the first time I played through Zestiria, and I saw that Heldalf had put Mikleo and Sorey's grandfather inside basically his body as part of his arm, and the only way they were going to be able to defeat Heldalf was to kill their grandfather. Something like that, it's terrifying. And even Flynn himself Flynn is from Vesperia, the goody two-shoes knight. He just blindly followed everything he, was told because of Alexei being the commandant and everything. He didn't want to be like his father. That's another example. The depth of these characters. Flynn didn't want to be like his father. He didn't want to break the rules. He wanted to do everything right because he resented his father for not being there he knows if his father had followed the rules and not broken the rules to save people, that his father would be here today. And Flynn didn't want to be that kind of knight. He wanted to be the model knight people could look up to and someone who never broke the rules. I think I've rambled on long enough about different examples of characters doing specific things. Honestly, I hope that this video can kind of reach out to different groups of people who maybe haven't been into the Tales franchise before and maybe give it a try, whether it's watching the anime for Tales of Zestiria or the Tales of Vesperia movie, or just picking up one of the games, one of the new titles. But I definitely am very grateful that Bandai has created a long-running series like this that has captured the hearts of so many fans worldwide. But anyways, guys, post your comments down below, especially if you're a Tales fan. Let me know what your favorite Tales game is and why. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. I will see you all next time.